It started as an ordinary Sunday in late June of 1998. Clear skies, no wind. That kind of southern summer morning where the air feels heavy even before noon. Where porch swings creak slowly and every dog in the neighborhood has already sought the shade at 1:12 p.m. 23-year-old Danielle Morgan stepped out onto the cracked concrete of her mother's front porch in Greenville. Arkansas sunglasses pushed up into her dark blonde hair. She wore faded Levi's, a white tank top, and the silver hoop earrings she'd bought at the county fair 2 summers earlier. Her black '97 Chevy Camaro sat gleaming at the curb, fresh from the Saturday wash she never skipped. She'd had the car for just over a year, her pride, her escape. The thing she babied even when she barely had gas money. Her mother, Lorraine, watched from the screen door as Danielle walked down the path. One hand holding a styrofoam cup, the other dangling her keys. "You'll be back for dinner?" Lorraine asked. "Couple hours," Danielle said over her shoulder. "Just meeting Kendra for coffee." Lorraine didn't think to ask which cafe. There were only 2 in town. Danielle didn't take a bag. She didn't mention that she hadn't actually spoken to Kendra since Friday. She didn't say anything about the other call she'd gotten. That morning, she just slid into the Camaro, turned the key, backed out. The engine's rumble faded down County Road 12. Lorraine shut the door by 5 p.m. Danielle's phone was going straight to voicemail. By 7 o'clock, her brother Mason was walking that same road with a flashlight, scanning the shoulder for skid marks or broken glass. At 10:04, the sheriff's office was called by morning. Danielle's Camaro was officially missing. Early investigation was more about what wasn't found than what was. No skid marks, no guardrail damage. No wallet tossed in a ditch. No witnesses who remembered seeing the Camaro leave town. The man she was supposed to meet that afternoon, according to Kendra, was not her. Kendra had been at her sister's in Little Rock all weekend. There was one other name that came up early, Clay Harrell. Clay was 27 then. Cleancut ran a local auto body shop, son of a well-known businessman. In high school, he'd been the quarterback. In adulthood, he was the man you called when you wanted your car restored or your name mentioned at the country club. He and Danielle had dated briefly the year before. Nothing serious, according to both of them. But the breakup hadn't exactly been mutual. When questioned, Clay told deputies he hadn't seen Danielle in weeks, said they were still friendly, but she had stopped returning his calls. He claimed he'd been home all afternoon on June 21st, working on invoices. His father vouched for him. The official search lasted 2 weeks. Helicopters flew over the river bottoms. Volunteers swept the woods behind the industrial park. Every pond within 15 miles was dragged. They found a rusted bicycle frame, 3 deer carcasses, and the stripped shell of an old Ford truck. They did not find Danielle Morgan or her Camaro. By August, her photo had moved from the front page of the Greenville Gazette to a bulletin board outside the Piggly Wiggly, tacked up beside a missing cat flyer. By 2004, she was a name on a bumper sticker. By 2008, she was mostly a story told to new deputies about how quiet towns aren't always safe. Only, Mason never let it go. He wasn't the kind of man who did candlelight vigils or television interviews. He was the kind who carried his sister's picture in his wallet until the edges curled and yellowed. The kind who stopped at every roadside Camaro shell he saw, just in case. The kind who didn't mind looking like he'd lost his mind if it meant there was even a chance she was still out there then. In May of 2010, a man named Vince Ramirez bought a foreclosed storage unit at an auction 2 towns south. Paid $112.60 for it. He expected a mattress or some old tires. Instead, behind a stack of rotted cardboard and blue tarps, found a 1997 black Camaro. The car was sealed shut, keys were in the ignition, and there was a single clean bullet hole in the hood. The Camaro sat under a thick coat of dust that dulled its black paint to a ghostly gray. The padlock on the unit door was rusted but intact. Vince had cut it at the auction, pushed the door up, and stepped back as daylight fell across the car's hood. The smell hit him first, not rot, not gasoline, just that strange sealed-in odor of something shut away for years. He walked around it once, slow. The tires were fully inflated. No broken glass. No visible damage, except that one perfect hole in the center of the hood, dead center, just above the emblem. When he leaned in, he saw something else. A faint, smiley face traced into the dust beside. The bullet hole police arrived within 20 minutes. By that evening, they had run the plates and confirmed what Vince already suspected: the car belonged to Danielle Morgan. Missing since June 21st, 1998, Mason got the call from Officer Langley, one of the few deputies who still answered when he rang. Langley's voice was careful, measured. "You need to come down here." Mason drove the 42 miles to the storage facility without speaking, his knuckles white on the wheel. When he saw the Camaro, he didn't say a word for almost a full minute, just stood there, staring. "That's her car," he said finally, voice low. "That's the car." Langley nodded. "We'll process it." "Try to get prints." Mason shook his head. "You won't get 12 years worth of dust off it. That's not how this looks. That's not 12 years sitting still. That's 3, 4 maybe. This thing's been moved." Langley didn't argue. The forensics techs worked the scene, dusting the driver's door, the trunk latch. They found partial prints on both, none conclusive. On the passenger side seatbelt, clipped shut, they found a single long blonde hair. Danielle's. Shade the glove box wouldn't open. The trunk was empty. But when Mason slid into the driver's seat and looked under the floor mat, he saw something odd. A cheap silver lighter wedged beneath the carpet. No initials, no scuffs. Danielle didn't smoke. The storage unit's lease. History was no better. It had been owned by a shell company, Black Ridge Partners LLC, registered to a P.O. box. The site's manager claimed the unit had been sealed since before he'd started working there 6 years earlier, and then there was the bullet hole. No casing was found in the unit. No ricochet damage under the hood, just the clean, deliberate puncture of a single round, and the strange, almost mocking curve of that dust-drawn, smiley face beside it. When Mason left that night, the Camaro was locked behind chain link, its windows reflecting the orange glow of the sodium yard lamps. He didn't sleep. Instead, he sat in his truck outside the storage lot until dawn, staring at the Camaro from a distance. Every so often, he thought he saw the faint outline of that smiley face glint in the glass, like whoever had drawn it was still close enough to see him watching. The Camaro sat in the county impound lot for 3 days, while the sheriff's office decided what to do with it. The official line was that the car had to be processed before anyone touched it. But Mason knew what processing meant in this county, a polite way of saying the case was going to sit until someone higher up decided there was enough public pressure to move. On the morning of the 4th day, Mason parked 2 blocks from the impound and waited for the night clerk to step out for his usual cigarette. Then he walked the perimeter, cut across the gravel, and slipped through the unlocked side gate. The Camaro sat alone in the far corner, its black paint dull in the gray morning light. He walked up to the driver's side, pulled the door handle, and found it unlocked. The leather seat still held its shape. Dust coated the dash in a soft film, except for the faint smudge where someone had brushed it clean around the glove box latch. That latch had been jammed when they found the car. The cops hadn't forced it yet. Mason clicked on his flashlight, wedged the end of a crowbar under the handle, and leaned in. With a crack, a latch gave. The glove box door dropped open. Inside, there were only 2 items: a faded cassette tape and a folded sheet of paper, sealed in a plastic sleeve. The paper was a gas station receipt, dated June 21st, 1998, 1:42 p.m., exactly 27 minutes after Danielle left home. The purchase was small: 1 soda, 1 snack. And a gallon of gas. On the back of the receipt in Danielle's handwriting was a single word: Clay. Mason's pulse thudded. Clay Harrell had told police he hadn't seen Danielle in weeks. He set the receipt aside and turned the cassette over in his hand. It was unmarked, from his jacket pocket. Mason pulled a battered Sony cassette player he'd bought at a pawn shop years earlier, just in case. He slid the tape in, pressed play. For a moment, there was only hiss and static. Then a voice, Danielle's voice, soft, unsteady, recorded in a room with an echo. I don't know if this will get anywhere, but if something happens to me, I need people to know I tried. I found things I shouldn't have. I think Clay knows. I think he's going to do something. Please tell Mason I didn't just leave. I didn't. There was a faint scrape, like the tape being pulled out mid-sentence. Mason froze, the player trembling in his hands. It had been 12 years since he'd heard his sister's voice, and now here it was, telling him exactly what he'd known all along. She hadn't run, she'd been taken. He drove straight to the sheriff's office and asked for Officer Langley. Langley listened to the tape twice. When it ended, his foot tapped once against the floor. She name's Clay, Langley said. Quietly on record, Mason replied. Langley nodded. We'll log it. Chain of custody. His voice analysis? No, Mason cut in. You'll sit on it, like they always have. I want this out. Langley gave him a look. Clay's got pulled. Friends in City Hall. If we're going to take this to the DA, we need more. Mason leaned forward, voice low. How much more do you need when the girl's voice is telling you who did it? Langley didn't answer. That night, Mason sat at his kitchen table with the tape recorder in front of him. He played the last 5 seconds over and over. On the 12th replay, he heard something he'd missed before, a faint metallic click in the background. Then another voice, deeper, older, with a slow southern drawl. Don't leave that in. The car. It wasn't Clay's voice. Someone else had been there. The next morning, Mason pulled out an old family photo album. Flipping through, he stopped at a snapshot taken 3 days before Danielle vanished, her leaning against the Camaro in front of the gas station on Route 6 in the background. Across the street was a silver SUV. He scanned the photo, zoomed in. The bumper carried a sticker for a now-defunct trucking company, Bayan. Freight. Danielle had mentioned that name once in a journal Mason had found after she disappeared. At the time, it meant nothing. Now it did. A quick search turned up the basics. Bain Freight had folded in 2002. In 1998, its logistics coordinator had been none other than Clay Harold. It was a link no one had documented by the following week. Mason had made a wall in his spare room, photos, the gas receipt, a printout of Danielle's handwriting, the cassette tape, Bain's company logo. He stared at it late into the night. The pieces weren't random, they fit. That's when his phone buzzed. It was the storage unit manager. We had some motion out back last night, near Unit 19, the man said. Camera's spotty, but someone was there. Mason's stomach turned. He drove straight over. The padlock was still on, but the tarp inside had been shifted, on the Camaro's windshield. Just above the old smiley face, someone had traced two fresh words into the dust. Stay out. Mason didn't call the cops. He called Ellie Mazer, the only reporter who'd covered Danielle's case in 1998 and never let it go. They're trying to bury her, he told her. Not anymore, Ellie replied. Ellie arrived at the Waffle House off I-90 at 8:14 p.m. Hair pulled back, notepad in her jacket pocket like it had been in 1998. She slid into the booth across from Mason, without ordering. You brought it? She asked. Mason slid the envelope across the table. Inside, the gas receipt, a photo of the Camaro and the storage unit. It's a digital copy of the cassette recording. She put the headphones in, hit play. Danielle's voice came through the tinny speakers, shaky, urgent, but clear enough that Ellie's expression went flat halfway through. When it ended, she took the headphones out slowly. Jesus Christ. Ch, I whispered. Mason didn't speak. Ellie flipped the receipt over, studied Danielle's handwriting on the back. She bought this right before she vanished, and she wrote his name. Clay, Mason said. Ellie met his eyes. You realize you're already betting your life on this? I've been betting it for 12 years. They moved to the next piece. Bain Freight. Ellie dug through her old clippings, some yellowed. Some digital printouts from early archives. There were rumors, she said, about misrouted shipments, off-the-books hires, a driver who went missing. But it all got chalked up to bad bookkeeping. Never went anywhere. Mason tapped the edge of the photo of the silver SUV. That company sticker was on a car parked near Danielle 3 days before she disappeared. Clay worked there. Danielle knew about them. Ellie leaned back, thinking. She was digging into Bayan. She wasn't just chasing gossip. There had to be something bigger. Mason had one more card to play. From the shoebox under his bed, he pulled a roll of undeveloped 35mm film he'd found in Danielle's things years earlier. It was labeled in her handwriting buy-in. June. Ellie called in a favor from a photo. Lab in Little Rock. The negatives came back faint, but usable. The first few frames showed trucks in a parking lot, some with Bayan logos, some without. Frame 6 stopped them cold. Danielle's Camaro was parked behind a shipping warehouse. Across from it, leaning against a loading dock, was Clay Harrell. Ellie traced the outline of his figure with one finger. She either took this herself, or someone gave it to her. Mason's jaw tightened, and she never got the chance to explain it. The final strip was stranger still. A man in a security badge near one of the trailers, face blurred mid-turn. On the back of that photo, Danielle had scribbled, "Same guy again." Saw him near Clay's shop? 2. Ellie looked up. She was being followed. That night, Mason didn't go home. He drove to Clay's old auto body shop, now shuttered and overgrown. The weeds were tall enough to brush the bumper of a rusted flatbed out back. Behind the garage stood a burned-out storage shed, roof half collapsed. Mason stepped inside, sweeping his flashlight over charred timbers, under a pile of warped boards. Something metallic caught the beam, a dented file cabinet half melted. He forced the drawer open. Most of the papers inside had fused into useless lumps. But one sheet was intact enough to read. It was a Bayan manifest dated 2 days before Danielle vanished. The shipment route ended at Unit 19, the same storage number where Danielle's Camaro was found 12 years later. Mason read it twice, his pulse climbing. Clay had used that unit before. A dry crack behind him made him freeze. He turned the flashlight toward the tree line. A figure stood just beyond the collapsed wall, still and silent, too far to make out clearly. By the time Mason swept the beam across the trees, the figure was gone. He drove home with the manifest on the passenger seat. By morning, Ellie had a copy in her hands. "This is proof he had that unit before she vanished," she said. Mason nodded. He knew exactly where he'd hide her car. Ellie's voice dropped. Or her. The email hit Ellie's inbox at 317a.m. No subject line, no body text, just an attachment named U_Dawn, single quotes, 2_half_of_it. .mp4. She didn't open it right away. She called Mason first. They met in her office above an old tax firm, the kind of rented second floor that still smelled like toner and lemon-scented Lysol. The video was grainy. Shaky, looked like it had been recorded through a cracked phone screen. A woman's voice whispered behind the camera. "He makes them use different names. Said she was a problem. Said she was too nosy." The frame shifted briefly, showing the back of a man's head, gray hair, warehouse lighting, a clipboard in his hand. Then another voice came through, male, calm, deliberate. No photos, no questions. "Just get her in the car." Static, black. End of clip. Mason didn't speak for nearly a minute. When he did, his voice was tight. "That's Clay." Langley listened to the file but shook his head. No timestamp, no location metadata. "Been filmed anywhere, not enough to use." Mason leaned over the desk. "You heard his voice." Langley's eyes were steady. "Suggestive isn't proof." It was the same wall he'd been hitting for 12 years. Back in Mason's garage that night, played Danielle's original cassette again the last 5 seconds. Boosted the background static, filtered the noise. There it was, a faint, metallic click. Then another man's voice, deeper, older, with a slow southern drawl. "Don't leave that in the car." Not Clay's voice. Someone else had been there the day Danielle was taken. 2 nights later, Mason met a woman named Sierra at a used record shop. Ellie had found her through an old internet forum, one of the few threads that had survived from the early 2000s. Back then, Sierra had left a single comment under an article about Danielle's disappearance. "He used to follow me, too. Back off before you end up like her." She told Mason she'd worked for Bayan Freight in 1998. handling inventory. Everyone knew Clay, she said. It was the kind who made you feel seen until you tried to leave. Right? Danielle had once asked Sierra about unlogged shipments. Sierra told her to be careful. 2 days later, Clay's cousin showed up at her apartment door. His name was Darren, Sierra said. Told me I'd be safer keeping quiet. From her bag, Sierra pulled out a worn notebook, pages curled at the edges. Danielle gave me this, she said. Told me to hide it if anything happened to her. Mason flipped through it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakably Danielle's names, initials, storage unit numbers, notes about people she'd seen. One page was circled 3 times. Unit. Number P, don't trust anyone if they know about it. Another entry. CH said she was just another cleanup. But he looked scared. Said the smile was new. Mason stared at the word smile. He thought of the dust-drawn grin on the Camaro's hood, and the one that had been freshened weeks later. Someone had been revisiting the scene. A week later, Ellie handed Mason a copy of a rental agreement. It was dated June 18, 1998, 3 days before Danielle vanished, signed in Clay Harrell's own name, Unit 19, paid in cash. He had the unit before she even went missing, Ellie said. Mason's jaw tightened. That means it wasn't panic. It was premeditated. Ellie hesitated. What if she's still alive? Mason didn't laugh. He didn't argue. Then they've been moving her all this time. That night, Mason went back to the Camaro in the evidence bay. No one was around. Slid into the driver's seat, leaned under the dash. Taped to the underside with black electrical tape was a mini recorder smaller than a cassette. Labeled in Danielle's handwriting, backup, do not play. He played it anyway. Danielle's. The voice came through, whispering, Clay isn't the only one. There's someone else. He calls him the broker. I think they're moving girls. I think they're watching me. A pause. Then even softer. I think he knows I planted this. The sound of a man's voice followed, low, growling, say, Goodbye, click. End of tape. Mason sat frozen. The name was out there now. The broker, by the end of the month, they had 3 missing girls tied to Bay and Freight, Danielle, 17-year-old named Riley Ditt from 1995, and another from 1997. Each case had been closed as voluntary disappearance. Each had a thin, almost invisible link to Clay Harrell's social circle, and all had one other connection. The original reports were filed by Darren K. Harrell. Clay's cousin, Mason, was no longer just chasing his sister's case. He was circling a whole network, and Darren was next on his list. It was Sierra who remembered the place they were going through. Danielle scanned notebook entries line by line when Mason stopped at one in particular. It's the place with the metal stairs and yellow light behind the freezer. It wasn't Unit 19. It wasn't Bain's lot. That was behind a diner, Sierra said slowly. We used to deliver there sometimes, always at night. Clay called it secure storage. Only certain drivers had keys. The diner was long closed. The parking lot was cracked and weeded over, windows blacked out with old plywood. Mason and Sierra walked around back. The metal stairs were still there, rusted, flaking but intact. The back door was locked, but not. Recently, the frame had been splintered at some point, the weather chewing at the edges. Inside, the air was heavy with a smell that was part rust, part bleach. A row of unplugged freezer units lined the far wall. Behind the last one, a narrow service hallway ended in a steel door. Mason pressed his ear to it. Nothing at first. Then faint, quick a thud another, then silence. Langley arrived 22 minutes later. His eyes were sharp, the kind of alert Mason had only seen from him twice before. What am I walking into? A freezer room that's been locked since '98, Mason said, with fresh boot tracks outside the door, and someone on the other side. Langley didn't hesitate. He went to his trunk, came back with bolt cutters at 9:37 p.m. They broke the lock. The room inside was narrow, cold, despite the unplugged units, and lit only by the spill of hallway light in the far corner. Curled against the wall was a woman, hands bound. Head covered, alive. She flinched hard when Langley reached her, twisting away until the hood came off. Mason's breath caught. It was Danielle. Her hair was longer now, tangled, streaked with gray. Her face was pale, drawn, eyes flicking wildly. To every sound, she didn't speak right away. When she did, her voice was barely audible. "Please, don't let him find me." The hospital took her under an alias. No press, no report. Not yet. Ellie stood beside Mason at the observation window the next morning. "She's still in shock," Ellie said quietly. "It might take days before she can talk." Danielle had only repeated one thing in the hours since. They'd found her. He'll come back. He'll come back. Mason thought she meant Clay. By the second night, he realized she didn't. When Danielle finally spoke in more than fragments, it was Langley she told first. "I wasn't supposed to be there," she said, her voice rasping from disuse. "I was following a truck one of Bain's. I thought Clay was meeting someone. I just wanted a photo." She described seeing another girl shoved into the freezer room, younger, crying. "I ran. Someone grabbed me, not Clay. Bigger, older." Mason leaned forward. "Do you remember his name?" She nodded. Double quotes, not his real one, just what they called him. The broker. The rest of her story came in pieces. They'd kept her in a cabin in the woods first, moving her when police pressure mounted on Clay. Then they'd brought her to the diner freezer room. "They said no one would ever find me," she said. "Said the world already forgot." Her voice faltered. Did they forget? Mason's answer was instant. By the time she finished, the case was too big for the county. State police took over, but they were already too late to get Clay. Harrell. He'd left his house at 4 a.m. the morning after Danielle was found, driving a white Dodge pickup with a single duffel bag in the back. By the time they found the truck burned out near a river access road, the VIN had been filed off and the plates removed. There was no body, only two things inside: a spent burner phone and a half-charred scrap of paper with two words still legible. "Ask Darren." Darren K. Harrell wasn't hard to find on paper. He'd resigned from the sheriff's department in 2000. Started a small private security firm in 2002, mostly property protection jobs, warehouses, seasonal hunting retreats, the kind of work that left no paper trail beyond an invoice. In 2004, he bought 40 acres of wooded land 5 miles outside of town. On paper, it was a firearms and survival training facility. No website, no classes, no public events, and no one. Mason spoke to it, ever seen it open. Ellie spread Darren's file across her desk, the pages curling from humidity. "You think Clay ran to him?" she asked. Mason shook his head. If Clay was running from the broker, he wouldn't go to his own blood. Not unless Darren was part of it. Ellie pointed to the property map. If Clay was tying off loose ends before he disappeared, this is where he'd do it. It took 48 hours for the State Bureau to secure a warrant. They hit the compound just after sunrise. The tactical team breached the perimeter in under 5 minutes. Darren was gone. The rooms inside were stripped, bare, except for one steel cabinet in a back office. Inside, 27 VHS tapes, each labeled only with initials and dates. Next to the tapes was a stack of worn ID cards and missing persons flyers. Danielle's was on top, so was Riley. It's from 1995. And another that made Ellie go pale. A photo of herself from 10 years earlier. Her middle name, Rachel, printed in bold across the top. "They were watching you," Mason said. Tape number 14 was Danielle, grainy, silent, but enough to prove she'd been in Darren's custody. Tape number 7 was Riley D. Tape number 22 showed Clay standing at the entrance to a storage unit, talking to someone off camera. Clay's voice: "This one's too much trouble. Get her down to Darren's place until we figure out what to do." Off-camera reply, male voice: "We'll keep her cold. Broker's orders." It was the first time they had the chain of command on record. Clay to Darren, Darren to the broker. But the broker was still just a shadow. No name, no address, no face. That night, Mason went back to the Camaro in the evidence bay. He opened the trunk, pulled back the carpet, Lining taped underneath was a metal key, scratched and tarnished, engraved with the number 24783. In Danielle's notebook, that number was circled with a single note beside it. If something happens, this is the last card. The bank was 2 counties over by the next morning. The safety deposit box labeled 24,783 was in Mason's hands. Inside was a manila folder, cassette tape, and a single photograph. The folder listed names, addresses, storage unit numbers, and bank wire transfers, all under the header, Operation. Summary: Broker, District 3, internal use. Only the cassette was Danielle again, her voice steady. The broker's real name is Carl B. Merton. He used to work for a bank. Later, he consulted for Bain's logistics division. If you're hearing this, I didn't make it out. The photograph was Danielle with a man in a gray button-up, hand on her shoulder. The same blurred face from the old developed film, Carl B. Merton, Public Records. Said Carl died in a car accident in Texas in 2009. No autopsy. No listed family. Buried in an unmarked grave under a different name. On paper, the broker was gone. But Darren was unsomewhere. And somewhere out there, he still had the keys to the rest of the network. 2 days after the raid on Darren's compound, a tip came in from a truck stop camera in eastern Oklahoma. A man matching Darren's description had fueled up a white Ford panel van, was paid cash, and left heading west. He was alone, but the clerk remembered something else. He said the man kept looking toward the van's rear doors. It's like checking to make sure they stayed shut. Ellie spread a highway map across Mason's dining table. If he's going west from here, she said, he's got a dozen options. But if he's still tied into whatever's left of Bain's old routes... Mason traced his finger across Interstate 40. There's a warehouse in Amarillo that used to be one of their stops. Danielle had it in her notes. Cross-reference. The dates from that ledger we pulled out of the deposit box. Ellie's eyes flicked to her laptop. 2 of the missing girls were last seen within 50 miles of that warehouse. Both cases closed cold within a month. They gave the lead to Langley. He listened, nodded once, and said, "I'll forward it to the State Bureau." Mason caught the pause. "You don't think they'll act?" Langley's jaw worked. "They will, but if Darren's still got connections in law enforcement," Mason finished the thought, "then someone will tip him off before they get there." That night, Mason parked across the street from Darren's old security firm, now empty. Windows dusty. The front door had been chained shut, but the back alley gate was ajar inside. Most of the offices were stripped, just like the compound. But in a locked desk drawer, Mason found something odd. A stack of printed shipping manifests from 2005, all routed through companies that didn't seem to exist anymore. One of them had the same storage unit number repeated 3 times in the notes section. 554K. Ellie ran it through a property database. It matched a rental unit outside Albuquerque, New Mexico. 2 states away, Ellie said. That's not where you stash something local. That's where you stash something you never want traced back. Mason looked at her. Or someone. They drove out themselves not to open it, but to see who might come and go. The facility was modern, gated, with coded entry and security cameras on every corner. They parked 2 blocks away and watched at 9:43 p.m. A dark SUV pulled in. A man got out, tall, heavy-set, wearing a ball cap pulled low. When he turned toward the keypad, the light caught his face just enough. It was Darren. He was inside for less than 6 minutes when he left. He wasn't carrying anything obvious, but his head turned toward the street twice before he got in the SUV, like he was expecting someone to be watching. Ellie's voice was tight as they watched the taillights disappear. "I can't sit on this. If there's anything in that unit..." Mason didn't answer right away. He was thinking of the Camaro, of the words "stay out" traced into its dusty windshield. "This isn't just about catching him," Mason said finally. "If he's moving people the way Danielle says they used to, every hour counts." The problem was, they had no warrant, and in New Mexico, they had no jurisdiction. Ellie was already pulling up contacts in Albuquerque by the time they got back to the motel. One name stood out. Detective Saul Vega, who'd worked a string of unsolved missing persons cases along the I-40 corridor in the mid-2000s. When she called him, he didn't seem surprised to hear Darren's name. "You think you're bringing me something new?" Vega said. "I've been chasing his shadow for 10 years. Vega agreed to meet them the next day at a diner outside the city. He brought a box of his own old photos. "Ports, maps, everything I've got points to 3 things," Vega said. 1. Darren's not the top. 2. He's still active. 3. If you follow him long enough, he'll lead you straight to whoever's running what's left. Mason sat forward. "You mean the broker?" Vega's eyes narrowed. "So you've heard that name too?" By the end of the meeting, Vega had agreed to set up surveillance on Unit 55-4K, but he warned them, "If you're right about this network being bigger than one guy, then walking into that unit without backup is asking to disappear." Mason didn't say it out loud, but he was already thinking the same thing Danielle must have thought back in 1998, that sometimes you only get one shot, and waiting for permission means you lose it. Detective Saul Vega didn't waste time. By the next evening, he had a surveillance van parked half a block from the Albuquerque storage facility. Lenses trained on Unit 554K's row. Mason and Ellie sat in the back, headphones on, a portable monitor glowing between them. They watched the gate open and close for hours, customers coming and going, mostly hauling boxes or plastic bins. At 11:12 p.m., Darren SUV rolled in. Darren again. He was wearing the same ball cap as before, but this time he wasn't alone. A second man stepped out from the passenger side. Older, shorter, moving with a limp. The security light caught his face just enough for Vega to swear under his breath. "That's Jeb Holloway," he said. "Ran security for a freight line in the early 2000s. Went off the grid in 2008. We thought he was dead." The 2 men worked fast, unlocking the unit, sliding the door just high enough to duck under, staying inside for less than 4 minutes. When they came out, Darren was carrying a large duffel bag. Jeb carried nothing, but his left hand stayed in his jacket pocket the whole walk back to the SUV. They didn't speak to each other until they were in the vehicle. Vega's team tailed them for 8 miles before Darren's SUV disappeared into a gated industrial lot on the city's south side. "Private trucking depot," Vega said, watching the dark swallow the taillights. "No active business license." He turned back to Mason and Ellie. "If they're moving anything tonight, it's out of that yard." They had a decision to make. Wait for a warrant that could take days. He'll go in before whatever was in that duffel vanished for good. Mason's choice was made before Vega finished speaking. "I've waited 12 years for a straight line to these people. I'm not waiting another 12 hours. The lock on Unit 55-4K was a standard cylinder type. Vega's tech popped it in under 30 seconds. Inside, the air was stale, smelling faintly of oil and something metallic. Rows of black plastic crates were stacked along the walls, each labeled with a date and an alphanumeric code. Ellie cracked one open. Clothing. All women's. Different sizes, different styles. Some folded, some crumpled, like they'd been stuffed away in a hurry. The next crate was worse. Driver's licenses, passports, and social security cards, all belonging to women who were either missing or officially relocated. Mason recognized one of the licenses instantly. "Riley did," he said. "The girl from 1995. In the far corner, under a tarp, was a small metal filing cabinet. The top drawer was empty. The second drawer wasn't. It held a single binder 3 inches thick, filled with shipping logs, coded. But the headers were clear enough. Broker District 3, OUTGO, EUTGO ING. Vega flipped through, his face tightening. "These aren't just local runs. Texas, Nevada, California, even up into Canada." Ellie looked at Mason. "This is a network." Mason didn't reply. His attention was fixed on the very last page of the binder, an entry dated just a week earlier. Destination code OKC-7 CONSIGNEE H. Latner. Status: in transit. Under notes: broker's priority live. The duffel Darren carried out of the unit wasn't here. Whatever was inside it was still moving. They photographed everything, sealed the unit, and left without leaving a trace. Vega promised to get the binder into the hands of someone who could move fast without tipping Darren off. But Mason could see the clock ticking in Vega's eyes. "You realize," Vega said, "if live means what I think it does, someone's got less than a week before they disappear into a hole like your sister did." Ellie's voice was flat. "Then we find Darren before that happens." By dawn, they had two things: a working list of Darren's old contacts along the I-40 route, and confirmation that the broker's operation hadn't died with Carl Merton's supposed accident. It had evolved, and Darren was now the one holding the keys. The binder's last entry became their roadmap. OKC7, H. Latner, broker's priority. Livbega had his team cross-check the consignee name against property records and trucking manifests. Nothing under H. Latner popped in Oklahoma. But an old utilities record from 2006 showed a Harold Latner renting a warehouse outside Norman, Oklahoma, a structure that hadn't had a meter reading in 4 years. They drove through the night, hitting the highway in a convoy Vega's unmarked sedan, Mason's truck, and a state police SUV. Ellie sat in the passenger seat of Mason's truck, the binder on her lap. "You know what we're walking into, right?" she asked Mason. Kept his eyes on the road. "Something Darren doesn't want us to see." They reached Norman just after dawn. The warehouse sat at the edge of an overgrown lot. Chain-link fence rusted and leaning dot from the road. It looked dead, windows dusty. A roll-up door half collapsed, but the ground told a different story. Fresh tire tracks cut through the gravel. Leading to a side entrance, Vegas split the team two to the rear, three to the front. Mason and Ellie moved in with Vega toward the side door. It was locked, but not reinforced. Vega's breaching tool popped it in one hit. The inside was dim, lit only by slats of sunlight through the high windows. The air smelled faintly of diesel and bleach. Rows of wooden crates lined one wall. Against the other was a row of industrial freezers. Humming quietly, they heard it before they saw it, a faint, rhythmic pounding, like someone kicking a wall in slow, spret intervals. The sound came from a crate near the center of the room. It was padlocked. Mason's stomach turned. Vega snapped the lock with bolt cutters and pried the lid off. Inside, huddled under a blanket, was a girl, early 20s, wrists zip-tied. Eyes wide in the sudden light. She flinched when Mason reached. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe now." Her voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. "Where's Darren?" They didn't get the chance to answer. The warehouse's rear door slammed. A voice shouted, deep, angry, familiar. "Darren, double quotes, drop it, and step away." Vegas. Team fanned out instantly, weapons up. But Darren was already moving, ducking behind a crate, firing a single shot that pinged off a metal beam before bolting for the back exit. Mason didn't wait for orders. He tore after him, sprinting past the stacked crates. Out into the blinding daylight, Darren's SUV was already rolling toward the road. Dust kicking up behind it, Mason's boots pounded the gravel. Vega's voice barked from behind. "Let him go! We've got the girl!" But Mason kept running until the SUV turned out of sight. Back inside, Ellie was already kneeling beside the rescued girl, offering her water. She was shaking so hard the bottle rattled in her hands. "He said the broker was coming," she whispered. "Said he was just keeping me until he got here." Mason and Ellie exchanged a look. Darren wasn't working alone, and the broker, whoever was filling Carl Merton's role now, was still active. That night, back at the motel, Vega laid it out. "We've got enough to put Darren away if we catch him. But if we want the one running this thing, we've got to make him come to us." Ellie closed the binder slowly. "You're talking bait," Vega nodded. "We make it look like Darren's girl slipped through, and she's ready to talk. Someone that high up will want to shut her down personally." Mason didn't hesitate. Then we set the trap. The plan came together in 24 hours. Vega's tech team mocked up a fake online chatter trail, whispers on private message boards, a falsified leak to a trucking forum, even an anonymous voicemail left on a prepaid line that Darren's people were known to monitor. The story was simple. The girl they'd pulled from the crate in Norman had escaped custody during transport. She was talking. She had proof. The bait wasn't the real survivor. She was under guard in a secure facility. Instead, Vega used an undercover officer, young, small, dyed hair and glasses, who could pass in dim light. They set the meeting point in an abandoned grain elevator 30 miles outside Oklahoma City. The only access road was a rutted track that cut through open pasture. No way in or out without being seen. Mason insisted on being there. Hidden in the upper catwalk with a rifle, Ellie stayed in the command van, monitoring feeds from hidden cameras they'd placed around the site. Vega and 2 agents stayed close enough to intervene, but far enough to keep the meeting looking clean. At 8:47 p.m., headlights appeared on the dirt road. An older black Suburban rolled in, its engine rumbling low. The driver's door opened. Darren, from the passenger side. Another man stepped out, taller, leaner, wearing a dark suit that looked too sharp for the dust and rust around them. The face was one Mason had only seen blurred. In photos and hearsay sketches, the new broker, the undercover officer, played her part. Standing in the open near the elevator door, a battered duffel at her feet, Darren kept his distance, eyes scanning the shadows. The broker moved closer, voice smooth, almost polite. "You've caused us some trouble," he said. "That's not wise." The officer didn't speak, just nudged the duffel with her boot. Inside was a decoy binder, weighted with scrap paper. The broker crouched, unzipped it, and froze when the red laser slid across his chest. Vega's team moved fast. 2 agents closed on Darren. One hit the broker low, pinning his arms. The Suburban's back doors flew open to more men spilling out. Armed, but Mason's warning shot cracked the air, sending them scrambling back. In less than 30 seconds, it was over. Darren cuffed. The broker cuffed. The hired muscle face down in the gravel. Back at the command post, the broker gave a name. Not his real one. Vega didn't expect that, but enough to cross-reference with old Bayan records and a bank transfer trail buried. Under shell companies, he'd been Carl Merton's deputy years before. Stepping into the role after Carl's staged death in 2009, the network's core had survived by cutting loose its top when heat got too close. This time, Vega promised it wouldn't. In the weeks that followed, charges stacked up: trafficking, conspiracy, unlawful confinement, the tapes, the binder, the survivor testimonies. All of it tied Darren and the broker into a web that prosecutors said could take years to unravel fully. But for Mason, the case had already crossed the finish line. Danielle was safe. The Camaro, still in the evidence lot, would be released back to her when she was ready. Ellie met Mason one last time at the diner, where it had all started. "You think it's really over?" she asked. Mason looked past her, out the window to the empty highway. "For Danielle, maybe," he said. "For the others, there's still more out there." Ellie nodded. "Then we keep looking." Mason's hand tightened around his coffee. "Cup 12 years," he said quietly. "All along, the truth was just waiting in the trunk."